Hi, and welcome to lesson number 15 of the Fundamentals of Slovenian Grammar course. So here's our diagram. We have the two worlds. We have the world of nouns and the world of verbs and all of the properties that they're made up of. And we said we can think of the diagram in terms of two basic categories. One is word types and the other is their properties. Now, so far, we've mostly talked about the world of nouns. And for a good reason, we said that the world of nouns is much more complex than the world of verbs, which it is. I mean, it's just nouns, adjectives, and pronouns, three different things versus just verbs. And then besides that, there are more properties that interact with each other. There's gender and number and case with as opposed to just number and person. So the world of nouns is much more complicated, and so we just had to explain gender and touch on case slightly and so on. So now in the next few lessons, or quite a few of the next few lessons, we will focus on verbs, because the world of verbs is sort of simple enough so that we can cover it entirely and get it out of the way, so to speak. So we will try doing that and sort of get it out of the way, so then we can return to the world of nouns and do all the other stuff like case and so on in more detail. And so this is the part of the diagram that we will be focusing on in the next few lessons. And so we'll have a look at how these things look like in Slovenian. So in English, we can see that we have the interplay of number and person. So we have the singular first, second, third person, and then the dual first, second, third person, and the plural first, second, and third person. And that is basically I work, you work, he, she works, the two of us work, the two of you work, the two of them work, and then the plural we work, you work, and they work. So basically in these lessons we will learn how to do that in Slovenian. In other words, we will learn how to conjugate verbs. To conjugate is a fancy term that basically means to do just that. I work, you work. So to go through the different forms of a verb, that is to conjugate a verb. And that's what we will start doing today. So we have a verb here, delati, to work. And we have the singular, dual, and plural. Those will be our columns, and our rows are the first, second, and the third person. So we're all set to conjugate the verb delati. So, delam, delaš, dela, delava, delata, delata, delamo, delate, delajo. Or in other words, I work, you work, he, she works, and then delava, the two of us work, delata, the two of you work, delata, also delata, the two of them work, delamo, we work, delate, you, plural, work, and delajo, they work. So the first thing to explain or to touch on is the fact that I did not read the pronouns, and the pronouns are also in brackets. So does that mean that the pronouns are less important than the verbs? Well, I would argue yes. They're more important enough so that we will leave them in brackets and not go into too much depth or detail on the pronouns right now. And the reason they are less important, the pronouns, especially when compared to English, is because if we think of English, we have I work and you work, and then he, she works is the only one that's different, and then we go right back to we work, you work, they work. So if we don't say I or you or we or they in English, it's just work, 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 work. We don't know what we're talking about. Now in Slovenian, this could hardly be any more different, because most of these verb forms are unique in Slovenian. They have a unique signature. So delam can only be jas, which makes jas kind of unnecessary. Delaš can only be ti. Now it's true that delava, the two of us, can be the two of us men or the two of us women. The male ones are also for mixed groups. So a man and a woman is still midva, sexist as it is. And that, so even though we do have kind of two options there, it's still much more defined than in English. And that's really not important, like the difference between midva and midve. The main point is that delava has a pretty unique signature in the sense of it can only be the two of us. Delamo can only be we, and so on and so forth. So that's why we, more often than not, actually, in Slovenian, do not include the pronoun. Now, there's nothing wrong with including the pronoun, and if you're a beginner, I think it's a good idea to include the pronoun, just so that you can learn the pronouns actively as well. But just know that there's no need, and in Slovenian, we more often than not, I would say, do not include the pronouns. Okay, now let me read once more, this time adding the pronouns. Jaz delam, ti delaš, on dela or ona dela, midva delava or midve delava, vidva delata or vidve delata, ona dva delata or oni dve delata, mi delamo or me delamo, vi delate or ve delate, oni delajo or one delajo. Now, the next thing we should talk about is the fact that delata can have two meanings. So of all of them, delata, the ta ending, is the most ambiguous one. So the ta ending can be you two or they two. So we're this kind of makes it more likely that we will use the pronouns with you two and they two, just to be sure if we're saying you two or they two. But even then, honestly, in practice, I mean, every time we're using Slovenian, we're using it within a context, and usually that context is rich enough to tell us exactly whether we're talking about you two or they two. So it's not like we have to always say vidva delata or ona dva delata. It's just that it makes it slightly more likely to do so. So ta is the only ending that's kind of ambiguous. The rest are pretty straightforward. So if we show this in the form of our slide here, the theory, verb forms in Slovenian are generally speaking unique. So we have 7 unique verb forms, and then number 8 and number 9 are kind of, they're both ta. So you two and they two share the same ending, which is ta. And like we said, pronouns are often omitted. So let's go through delati again. Delam, delaš, dela, delava, delata, delata, delamo, delate, delajo. Now, how do we conjugate verbs in Slovenian? Well, really we just have to know kind of one thing. Our starting point is we have to know that the infinitive is made up of a stem and an ending. Now, ending is a fancy or a technical term for the last letter or the last few letters of a word that have a grammatical function. That's an ending. It's kind of the end of a word with a grammatical function. Now, the stem is everything that's not the ending, basically. Everything that comes before the ending in the infinitive is a stem. So, delati can be broken down to dela plus ti. Everything that comes before ti and the ti. And so, if we know that, then we just have to replace ti with the right ending, and that's how we conjugate verbs in Slovenian. So, going back to our table, we have delati. And now, basically, we know that if we get rid of the word dela from all of these 9 conjugated forms, what we're left with, by definition, has to be the formula of how to do them. So, if we highlight, if we kind of just highlight everything that's not dela in these examples, then here's what we're left with. It's delam, delam, delaš, dela, which is a 0 ending, delava, delata, delata, delamo, delate, delajo. So the formula is you take the part that comes before a ti, and then you either put a m, sh, or nothing. In that case, you just get rid of the ti, and that's the he, she form, and then va, ta, ta, or mo, te, jo. And that is how we conjugate verbs in Slovenian. So we have the stem plus the ti, in this case dela plus ti, and it's either a m, sh, nothing, va, ta, ta, mo, te, jo. So maybe you can pause the video and just say this out loud a few times, even though it's pretty weird. So you can say m, sh, nothing, va, ta, ta, mo, te, jo. Now, this is how we conjugate regular verbs. Next time, we'll have a look at how to conjugate irregular verbs. Regular means that nothing weird happens along the way, and irregular means that something unpredictable happens that we have to learn by heart. Now, Slovenian grammar does have both regular and irregular verbs, but not in the same way as other European languages have irregular verbs, say French or Italian, because there verbs can go completely crazy and you just have to learn everything by heart. With Slovenian verbs, the endings always stay the same. The endings never go crazy. So it's the dela part, it's the stem part that can kind of go crazy and that can change completely. But once that change happens, it's the same change throughout all of these 9 forms. So dela can change, but then once it changes, it's still that thing plus m, sh, nothing, va, ta, mo, te, yo. So in that sense, Slovenian irregular verbs are simpler than the irregular verbs of other European languages. And maybe before we end today's lesson, what you see on screen right now is about, I'd say, a solid 80%, if not more, of everything there is to say on verb conjugation in the present tense in Slovenian. So yes, we have exceptions, and yes, we have irregular verbs, and we will cover all of that in future lessons, but this is pretty much most of what there is to say, especially for a beginner. So hopefully now it's clear how to conjugate verbs. I hope this was somewhat useful or interesting. Take care and see you in the next lesson. Bye-bye.